The LA Kings made a big splash early in the offseason by signing Kevin Fiala. Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings joins us to talk about that and all things LA Kings as they prepare for the 2022-2023 season.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us today, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show the host of Locked On LA Kings, Eddie Garcia. And Eddie, been an eventful offseason. They started it with a splash. Kevin Fiala joining the Kings. Talk to me a little bit about what kind of an impact you expect from him and where do you think he'll fit into the lineup?
Well, the Kings went out and addressed their biggest need right off the bat, and that was a top-line winger to go along with Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe, who had a breakout year last year. And so that was the biggest thing on everyone's wish list as Kings fans, and the organization obviously was understood that as well, that this is a team that is very solid defensively, but does have a deficiency in scoring and needed to get more scoring, obviously, from their front line. Their second line last year, second in name, was probably their best line with Phillip Danault, Trevor Moore, and Victor Arvidsson, who was a bit in and out of the lineup with injury, but Phillip Danault was amazing. And that line really, in some key moments, that was the line that went over the boards. But Kopitar, Kempe, and at the time, Alex Iafallo, we're right there. It was kind of a 1A, 1B situation. But, with all due respect to Alex Iafallo, he's just not a top-line player. And he's really suited for a second or even a third line role, which is probably where he's going to play it this year. But going out and getting Kevin Fiala, a guy who had a career year last year with over 80 points and 33 goals, and it's exactly what the Kings are looking for. More punch up front, and also a guy who can help out on the power play as well. They were 27th in the power play last year. That's not going to get it done. We saw in that first round series against Edmonton what a really good power play can do and how that can propel you into the playoffs past the first round. So that was something they needed to address, and they really did that. They addressed the power play. They addressed the top line, getting more scoring with getting Kevin Fiala.
Yeah, so big check mark right there off of that box. The Kings surprised a lot of people making the playoffs last year. Everyone thought maybe that was a year ahead of schedule. How do they build on that success? And what did they take away from the success they had last year?
Yeah, I did not think the Kings were going to be a playoff team last year. I had them battling for a playoff spot late in the year, and I thought that would be progress. So in my mind, they were ahead of the curve. I think they are singing a different tune. They believe they're on track, that they're not ahead of the curve. But I think how they build on it, I got to give a lot of credit to their head coach, Todd McClellan, who literally in the post-game press conference after losing Game 7 was already setting the tone for this year. He wanted his players to know immediately after that wasn't good enough and that they need to be better next year, and all the good things that came from last season. Phillip Danault having a career year, Trevor Moore having a career year, Adrian Kempe having a career year. All those things are great, but if you don't build on it for the next season and carry it forward, then it doesn't really mean anything. And he, like I said, he didn't waste any time in setting that tone. He wanted to make sure that nobody felt like this was some sort of accomplishment, even though, yeah, a lot of people think that they were ahead of the curve, that they were in that series against Edmonton to win it. And remember, they had the lead and going into Game 6 on home ice, and they couldn't get it done. So in his mind, this is a team that's on track. And like I said, he set the tone immediately after that game. Some people were kind of like, wow, this guy is like not enjoying the moment. But I mean, that's really where you should be, right? If you expect this team to be better and growing and going forward, you're not just satisfied with making the playoffs. You're not just satisfied with pushing up maybe a better team to 7 games. And so I think that's where they build upon it. I think a lot of guys going into this offseason have the attitude of, okay, that was a taste. Now it's time to take the next step. And I know a guy like Drew Doughty, who was injured and couldn't play in the playoffs. Yeah. He wanted the season to start about a month after the playoffs ended. I mean, he's ready to go. He's as excited as I've seen him at any point in his career. And he's ready to get on the ice and be one of the leaders of this team going forward.
Let's talk a little bit about Quinton Byfield. Expectations very high, second overall pick in the 2020 draft. Had some injury issues, missed the first half of the season. What do you see for him in the upcoming year?
Well, hopefully, as you mentioned, it starts being healthy. Have a solid training camp, have a solid preseason, and then be slotted in as that third line center behind Andrei Kopitar and Philip Deneau, and take a step forward. I think a lot of Kings fans are very worried, I guess, maybe the word, about his development. Look, he's still 19. This is a guy who last year could have very well still played junior hockey. So I think those worries are a little bit premature. But if we don't see a little bit more from him this year, I can understand where it's coming from because of where he was selected in the draft, and because you see a guy like Tim Stützle, putting up numbers for the Ottawa Senators, different positions, different situations, but still, it's hard not to compare and see a guy who's a little bit more productive at the same, was picked right around the same spot. So, but I think he's ready for it. They had a development camp here recently, and he was the best player on the ice. And you could say, well, he should be, but still, I mean, he looked like a guy that was out there with a lot of confidence, being the top player out there. And like I said, I think stay healthy, full training camp. He'll hit the ground running, I think, to start the season. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of the flash and the playmaking ability that we saw him play at the junior level, when obviously there were all the accolades and him being the second overall pick. So I still think it's way premature for a lot of the fans that are they have their hand over the panic button, not pushing it yet, but it's hovering over it. I'm like, okay, not just yet, but I understand where they're coming from. When you pick a player that high, you expect him to be more of an impact player. But I think this is the year we're all expecting to see more, a pretty good step forward for him this year.
Eddie, training camp is less than a month away now. What would you say is the biggest concern the LA Kings have heading into this season?
I think it's goaltending. We know who the goalies are, but we're not sure who's the number one goalie. Is it Jonathan Quick, who's going into the final year of his 10-year contract? Could this be his final season, not only as a King, but in the NHL? Will he do a Dustin Brown? And, what Dustin decided late in the year, this was the last year of his contract. Obviously a part of 2 Stanley Cup winners and had a great career here, but he didn't want to hang on or maybe go to another team. He wanted to end his career as a King. I don't know what Jonathan Quick is thinking, but we're all very anxious to see. And then he had a bit of a resurgence last year from his last 2 seasons, and he won the number 1 job. It was a 1A, 1B for a lot of the season with Cal Peterson, and at the end of the year, Quick was clearly the better goaltender. And Cal Peterson's his contract kicks in this year of a 3-year extension he signed last year. And they're paying, I believe it's $10.8 million in their goaltenders. That's if Carey Price doesn't play, which he's not going to, that's the highest price tandem in the NHL. And when you think of the highest price tandem in the NHL, you're probably not thinking LA Kings. I mean, these are 2 B-level goalies, right? They're not A's and they're not C's. They're kind of B's, both of them. So I think the Kings were expecting Cal Peterson to take a step forward last year and win the job, and it didn't happen. Is this the year he does it? I don't know. It's a real question mark going into this season. I think that whoever wins the job is good enough to get him in the playoffs, but are they good enough to get him deep in the playoffs? I'm not sure. So it really is a concern. Who's going to win the job and how well are they going to play this year?
Lots to think about, lots to keep an eye on. Eddie, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, it's Locked On LA Kings. I know I talked to you about it, having a good time with the YouTube channel and getting that thing going. We are at Locked On LA Kings on Twitter. Me personally, I'm at Eddie on Fox, EDDIE on Fox. And I've been on the Fox Sports Radio Network for 20 plus years. So I have a good time doing some overnight sports talk as well, but hockey is obviously my passion, and really excited this is going to be my first season with the LA Kings with Locked On Kings. I joined during the off season. And so I'm really excited about this season, not only because of the expectations for the team, but of just me hosting this show for the first time. So really excited about it. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we're excited to have you, and good luck this season to you and the Kings. Eddie Garcia, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that could happen? You can end up driving below the speed limit. It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Get high, get a DUI.